Hello there, students. Thank you for being part of this presentation. My name is Luis Silva. I am your world history teacher, and today we're looking at the age of exploration, which is from roughly the 1400s all the way to the 1700s. Let's move on. From the 1400s to the 1700s, Europeans experienced what we know today as the age of exploration. The Renaissance had encouraged curiosity as well as a desire for trade. As a result of exploration, European nations grew very powerful and were able to spread their influence throughout the world. But what were some of the motives for exploration? Well, we're going to be looking at those motives as we move on through this presentation. There were three motives for exploration, and this is the first one. The first motive is gold, money. A desire for new sources of wealth was the main reason for European exploration. The Crusades, as well as the Renaissance, had stimulated European desires for new goods, including goods from the Asian part of the world. And this desire for new goods inspired and motivated many European nations and explorers to go out into the world and see what they could find in order to acquire wealth. Merchants began looking for quick and direct trade routes to Asia to avoid Muslim as well as Italian merchants and be able to increase profits. So merchants became a dominant force during the age of explorations as they wanted to acquire a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of wealth. The second motive for exploration is glory. The Renaissance inspired new possibilities for power and prestige. Exploration presented Europeans the opportunity to rise from poverty and gain fame, fortune, as well as a high status. Kings who sponsored voyages also were able to benefit greatly. They gained power, they gained colonies overseas, and obviously this made their nations very wealthy. And this is a direct result of exploration. The third motive for exploration is God, religion. European Christians, especially Catholics, wanted to stop the spread of Islam and convert non-Christians to the faith. So Christianity became a dominant player during the age of exploration, as explorers had been instructed, especially Europeans from Spain. They had been instructed to go into new lands and spread Christianity, Catholicism. Explorers were highly encouraged to spread Christianity, and not only that, but to take missionaries with them so that these missionaries could preach and convert non-Christians into becoming Christians. But what were the means? How were explorers able to sail so far and make it back again? Before the Renaissance, sailors did not have the technology to sail very far from Europe and be able to return safe back to Europe. Trade and cultural diffusion during the Renaissance introduced new navigation techniques to Europeans. The first navigation technology that was used during the age of exploration was the magnetic compass, which made sailing more accurate. The second technological innovation was the astrolabe. The astrolabe used stars to show directions, very important for European explorers, as this made it possible for them to navigate far away from mainland Europe and be able to explore new lands. The third component that made it possible for explorers to move around the world was maps. Maps were used more accurate and used longitude and latitude, and this made it fairly easy for explorers to find their way back to Europe and other parts of the world. Another important component of the age of exploration was the caravel. European shipbuilders built a better ship. In this case, the caravel was a strong ship that could travel in the open seas and in shallow waters. Caravels had triangular slanting sails that allowed ships to sail against the wind. Very important technological component that was added to this particular ship. On top of that, it had a movable rudder which made the caravel more maneuverable. In other words, it could navigate through different types of terrain, and it was fairly safe for explorers to do this prior to other ships before the age of exploration. It also had cannons and rifles, which gave the ships more protection. So people were scared to actually attack them because they had means to defend themselves. So now that we have talked about the motives for exploration, which is gold, glory, and God, and we talked about the means that made it possible for exploration, in this case the magnetic compass, the astrolabe, maps, and the caravel. Now we're going to be looking at who were the explorers, where did they go, and how did they change world history. Europeans were not the first to explore the oceans in search of new trade routes. Islamic merchants explored the Indian Ocean and had dominated the Asian spice trade for centuries before European exploration. But in the late 1400s, the European sailors did what neither Muslims nor Chinese explorers could do. They began global, not regional, exploration and created colonies to increase their wealth and power. Portugal was the early explorer in the age of exploration. In Portugal, Prince Henry the Navigator started school of navigation to train sailors. He brought in Europe's best map makers, shipbuilders, and sailing instructors in order to train people to explore the world. He wanted to discover new territories, find a quick trade route to Asia, and expand the power of Portugal. Prince Henry's navigation school and willingness to fund voyages led the Portuguese to be the first to explore the west coast of Africa. Vasco da Gama was the first explorer to find a direct trade route to Asia by going around Africa to get to India. Portugal gained a sea route to Asia that brought them great wealth. As you can see on the map, you have this red line that goes around Africa and it goes all the way to India. This was the route that was discovered by Vasco da Gama. During the age of exploration, Portugal created colonies along the African coast, in Brazil, and the Spice Islands in Asia. If you can see from the map here, everything is basically color-coded. You see that the red lines and the red areas, especially in what we know today as Latin America, belong to Spain. Then you have Portugal, which is basically the purple lines, the purple areas around different areas of the world. That belongs to, in this case, Portugal. And then you have the orange areas that belong to England. And then you have the dark green areas that belong to France, including obviously all of the lines that you see there, color-coded for the different nations that were exploring around this time. The Spanish government saw Portugal's wealth and they did not want to be left out. More than any other European monarch, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain sponsored and supported overseas expeditions. Like most educated men of the Renaissance, Columbus believed the world was round and thought he could reach Asia by sailing west. Columbus reached the Bahamas in America, but thought that he had actually reached islands off the coast of India. Very important. You see this map here. You see, in this case, the Spanish explorer Christopher Columbus, who sailed from Spain all the way to what we know today as the Bahamas. Christopher Columbus ultimately made 4 trips to India, never knowing that he was not in India, but instead he was in this new land that we know today as America. Despite the fact that Columbus never found Asia, Ferdinand Magellan still thought he could reach Asia by sailing west. Magellan became the first explorer to circumnavigate the earth, go all the way around Earth basically, and he's famous for that. Magellan basically is known for having explored basically the entire world, and if you see here on the map, you see how how he took off from Europe. He went all the way to the tip of South America, and then he kept on going through the Pacific Ocean and made it back all the way to his original sailing point, and he is very famous for that. During the age of exploration, Spain was able to create many colonies in North and South America. As you can see from the map here, all of that red area basically belonged to Spain. It was controlled by Spain. This is where Spain took a whole bunch of wealth from. This is where Spain was able to build a group of colonies that they dominated. Here's another map of the areas that were controlled by Spain. And Spain basically sent explorers. And those explorers were called conquistadors to the New World, to find gold, to claim lands, and to spread Christianity. If you see here, you basically see most of or parts of North America. You see what we know today as Mexico. You see what we know as Mesoamerica or Central America. And we also see that Spain took a whole bunch of lands in South America. In this case, one of the famous conquistadores or conquistador of Spain was Hernando Cortés. Another very famous conquistador was Francisco Pizarro, as he conquered the Inca Empire, very famous for that in 1532. The influx of silver from America made Spain the most powerful country in Europe during the early years of the Age of Exploration. Unfortunately, most of this wealth that was taken from the Americas, from the native population back to Spain, did not serve Spain for a long time because they wasted that money in basically nothing. England, France, and the Netherlands also became involved in the overseas exploration and colonization as well. The French explorer Samuel de Champlain searched Canada for a northwest passage to Asia. After failing to do so, Champlain found the French colony of Quebec. Since the French were actively searching for new lands, they soon carved out a large colony along the Mississippi River from Canada to New Orleans. You can see from the map there, you see the areas that were controlled by the French, you see the areas that were controlled by the English, the Dutch, as well as the Swedish. Unlike other European nations whose kings paid for colonies, the English colonies were paid for by citizens who formed joint stock companies. English colonies formed along the Atlantic coast of North America by colonists were motivated either by religion or by the need to acquire wealth. The English explorer James Cook was the first European to make a contact with Australia, New Zealand, as well as Hawaii. You can see there on the map, all of that red line is the area that was actually explored by James Cook. Also, like England, the Netherlands, the Dutch allow private companies to fund explorations. The Dutch had colonies in America and Africa, but the Dutch East India Company dominated trade in Asia. Now that we have seen all of this movement, all of these countries, European countries, trying to acquire new lands, we need to see what were some of the consequences of the movement of those Europeans into new lands. And here we have basically what we know as the Columbian Exchange. We have the movement of goods from one part of the world to another part of the world. And I'm just gonna let you see this and pause the video so you can see what moved from the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia, and from Europe, Africa, and Asia to the Americas. You'll see that there's a whole bunch of goods that were moved in terms of animals, plants, as well as diseases. Very important because especially the diseases were responsible for killing millions of Native Americans. We have come to the end of this presentation. Please make sure to subscribe and I will see you in the next presentation.